So I wanted to share a little perspective with you about pain, because of the few things in life that humans are guaranteed, pain is one of them. And for many of us, it is served up abundantly while we journey down the path of our lives. And I can point out a whole lot of things that a lot of people don't think about why humans suffer and go through massive amounts of pain and trauma that would all be geared towards things that actually happen, but are going to have much more of a negative connotation to the, truth. So when I start looking back at my own experiences, things that I've learned, things that I've read, considerations or conclusions or things I've considered and conclusions I've arrived at, come to see that when you finally get to a point in life, however that manifests for you, where you can start to at least consider I don't want to generalize them and trivialize them by way of saying trials and tribulations of life. But when you start looking at the epidemic of childhood abuse, childhood trauma, and other such things that take place upon this earth, across cultures, across countries, first world, second world, third world, and it, in and of itself, has that scenario, that thing, feeding on itself apparently has given rise to the epidemic of narcissism that we have upon the earth. Humans have known copious amounts of pain that have come at us through multiple different avenues of approach to the human, if you will. So we get this shit coming at us from all directions. Now, if there's one thing I know about pain, is that most people will say straight up, I don't like it, don't want it, keep it, fuck off, get out of my face, that kind of stuff. I'm not playing that, I don't want it. And when life does to us, to any of us, what it is that life does to us, invariably, for instance, with personal intimate relationships of just about any kind, there's going to be pain associated to those relationships. And when you look at the context of human suffering and abuse and all that other stuff, humans start experiencing copious amounts of pain at a very young age. And as children, we are relatively resilient. Now, there are exceptions to every rule. I'm speaking in this context in generalities. Certain things will affect certain people in certain ways. Some people are more fragile than others. Some people are stronger than others. So there are certainly going to be anomalies. But what I've seen it in myself and I've seen it in other people. Running from your pain. It's a natural response, I think, to pain. There are several types of pain. And I'm not talking about physical pain. So I've gone through my own version of hell a handful of times in this life. And I've reached a level of age and life experience where I've been able to look back upon the experiences and analyze them with just a different perspective. It's a lot different to analyze a situation, let's say something highly traumatic, when you no longer have an emotional charge, for instance, tied to that experience. And being able to do it gives you the ability to look at that and see that experience from a different perspective. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Pain. Something that most humans will run from. Children, like I said, being as resilient as they are, tend to have a way, even unconsciously, actually largely unconscious, where when traumatic experiences unfold in their lives and happen to them, where they're able to suppress the pain and the trauma, and they don't do it consciously, into their subconscious mind and continue to march forward in many cases without skipping a beat. But over time, as that experience, that trauma and the pain associated to it is suppressed, there's an analogy that I'll give you. Trauma and pain that are suppressed within the recesses of the subconscious mind you could liken them to a refrigerator in this context. If you go out to the store and you fill up your refrigerator with all kinds of food, well, there's a couple of assumed things, but I want to state them to bring them into our awareness. If you don't actually eat all of the food in the refrigerator, even though it's a cool environment where it will keep much longer than normal, everybody knows that even in the refrigerator, food eventually spoils. Food eventually rots. Food can eventually go rancid because you didn't eat it all. That's the point. So if you go out and fill up your refrigerator, meaning with groceries and go to the store or whatever, and fill up your refrigerator, if you don't eat all of that food, effectively it's going to go bad. And then everybody knows what that process of going bad is. It starts to go putrid, then it starts to go rancid, then it starts to stink, and yada, 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 yada. And eventually you got a real nasty mess on your hands. And depending on how valuable the container is, there might come a point where you might just decide to throw the whole fucking thing away and not even pop the lid or try to open it. that same process relevant to food that you don't eat, that you store in your refrigerator, rotting into that putrefied, nasty thing, it gets to the point where it's so bad, it's got to be dealt with. Same thing with the trauma and the pain that we suppress. Now, when you open the refrigerator, oh boy, it stinks like it lets you know something in here. Run, you got to figure it out, get rid of it. Similar analogy to the human being. The longer the trauma and the pain is suppressed within our being, in a metaphorical but quite literal kind of way, it begins to putrefy, turn rancid, rot, and stink, and all kinds of other things when you start to think about it in a metaphorical yet somewhat literal way. As that putrefaction and rotting within us happens, what that tends to do for most people is adjust human behavior. It adjusts human perception and perspective, or internally, the way in which we view things that may ultimately adjust human behavior. So when you start to think about suffering the way that we do, pain the way that most humans experience it, and for a lot of us, we suppress it and or avoid it. I think that's a fair statement for a lot of people. Even a healthy person doesn't necessarily want to open their arms when an experience takes place that's going to be, and just embrace the pain and come on and just let's snuggle the fuck up. No, pain is not something that we want to experience, especially for prolonged periods of time. It's just the way we're wired. But there are some things that I have learned through my journey over the last 7 years. And most specifically over the last 4.5, since I had that experience with the person I had that experience with that just thrust me into a level of darkness that encompassed pain and suffering, all this shit. I just, started looking back at it. I started to realize some things about pain. And if you are conscious, and if you are analyzing the experience to the best of your ability, you will find nuggets of wisdom along the way. And, let me explain even a little more. So, when it comes to things like, for instance, human relationships, there's a lot to learn. And you ought not just jump into a relationship with somebody just because they're pretty or they make you smile or something trivial or simple. We ought to choose more carefully. Thusly, since we do what we do the way that we do it, as unhealthy and just stupid as it is, we experience as a human a lot of pain. Now, a lot of us through those deep connections will be abandoned, be betrayed, be cheated on, or that's betrayal, and all types of other things that cause all sorts of pain, resentment, anger, bitterness, these types of emotions. A lot of people out there are more capable than they want to admit of being able to suppress and repress this shit within themselves so that they can keep on keeping on, so that they can keep the pretty smile on and let the world think that they're strong as hell. Inside, they're fucking dying. And pain, for most people, is largely avoided. And some of the things that I've learned is that pain in these types of scenarios, this type of pain, life pain from, for instance, relationships and whatever else can bring it, is designed to teach you something. And when you don't face it, feel it, and feel through it. I mean, I hate cliches, but there's a perfect cliche that says you've got to feel it to heal it. And it's actually true. Now, here's the thing that most people don't realize about feeling their pain. When you allow yourself, whether you're forced to, or whether you allow yourself to feel that fucking pain that most people sanely, rationally would say, no fucking parts of that shit. When you allow yourself to, because it's a big heaping helping, a bucket full, a wheelbarrow full of a lesson that you're supposed to learn somehow, approaching the perspective from spiritual lessons, soul journey. If any of that shit has any actuality, and you look at it from a higher perspective that allows you to see that there are some deeper lessons, up to and including some pretty hard life lessons about choosing wisely, seeing red flags, this, that, and the other. That pain that you get is designed to teach you about such subject matters and whatever else. And here's the thing. Here's how the pain is supposed to work in these situations. It's supposed to drive your mind into questioning things about the experience that was the source of the pain, both external circumstances and internal circumstances, to find the cause of the pain. And in asking those questions, you begin to learn things. You begin to learn things about patterns of behavior from people that you're dealing with. You begin to learn things about yourself, patterns within you. If the mind is not, in so many cases, driven to the point where it almost has no choice but to ask these questions, because the answers will be the beginning of the process of ending the fucking pain, preventing the pain from happening again, at least in that fucking way. Hence the lesson. If we're avoiding the pain, if we're putting it down, letting it go, never going back to it and all that other shit, in so many ways, as fucked up as this may sound, because nobody wants to feel through a whole heaping helping of Hurt Locker. Nobody wants to feel through a whole heaping helping of Hurt Locker at all. But isn't there an interesting paradox there, so to speak? Maybe it's a dichotomy. I'm not sure what the appropriate word is, where on the flip side of that coin, you deprive yourself of the lessons that you would have otherwise learned through the pain that drove your mind to ask questions, that caused you to seek answers to the source of the pain. When you don't deal with those traumas and deal with the pain, along with that pain may very well manifest resentment, bitterness, malice, hatred, and all those other types of caustic emotions that, while they may be very well-founded and righteously founded, because an injustice took place, a betrayal took place, whatever it might be, it's not for nothing. Interestingly enough, those caustic emotions, even if those caustic emotions are derived from an accurate perspective and perception of what actually happened, and it was horrible and it was heinous and it was fucked up and it shouldn't have happened and you got totally fucked and blah, 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 blah. Those emotions act almost like a fucking magnet that binds you to a trauma or to pain that will be your baggage and your burden. And then as these things begin to stack on top of us in life, as time goes on, we wind up with like a Santa Claus sized bag. I fucking had one, of baggage that we haven't dealt with, that we haven't felt through the pain associated. We haven't done anything to heal it. And here's the thing. If someone could bring you to a point where you could just let go of that Santa Claus sized bag of pain and suffering and trauma, I'll just move forward. On a lot of levels, if there is something here for us to learn through this journey of life and all that other stuff, we are completely and totally negating the lessons that would have otherwise been learned through the experience of going back to that trauma to try to heal it, going back to the pain and allowing yourself to feel through it. Because just like the food in the refrigerator, it's going to putrefy within you if it's not dealt with. Like food, eat it. Like the trauma, face it, deal with it, come to terms with it. Now, strangely enough, sometimes it's impossible to come to terms with an awful lot of the traumas that humans experience, specifically as children, until later in life, until you have had the opportunity to grow as a human, as an adult, and mature mentally and emotionally to a degree where you can then look back at an experience that was terrible and be able to, through various ways, reframe what that shit meant to you. And the strange thing about pain is that what I've experienced, and I experienced it in a way that I had never experienced it really before in my life, but I started to see this the pain that's associated to profound trauma, betrayal, whatever type of fucking trauma it is a process that is much like grieving. And strangely enough, up until my dog died, my Cane Corso that some of you have seen pictures of in some of my monologues, I had truly never lost anything that was that close to me that induced grieving. Then I went through that grieving process in 2014 and into 2015 and began to realize, there's certain times where there's a process you got to go through. You got to go through it in your own time. You got to experience it all the way the grieving process, and it has its stages. You can't force them. You can't speed them up for the most part for most people. And over time, eventually, the quote unquote wound that we have, that the grieving that we were going through was tied to, heals and closes itself, so to speak, to the point where we can look back at whatever that experience was, and it doesn't knock us way off kilter energetically, emotionally, or anything like that. That's, grieving. I forget all the stages of grieving, but it's a process, and you've got to go through them each organically, your own way, feel through all this shit. And many of you may know what I'm talking about. If you've not gone through grieving yet, when you finally do, you'll see. But what I have found pain is, especially the pain that we're forced to deal with, is very much like the grieving process. There are stages to dealing with it that take their own amount of time for you to process and release, or for the pain to have less of an effect on you and other such things. It's very much a process. It's not the grieving process, but it's likened to it. It has its stages, its phases. They come in their own fucking time. They end in their own time. The new one begins, and it doesn't fucking end until you've gone through it. And for people who try to avoid it, you'll find that there's still lingering damage and the remnants of that, lingering pain, lingering trauma, remnants that you don't otherwise want to deal with. When the trauma is deep, whether it meaning it cut you deep or it goes deep into childhood, and it's just, this pain can be profound. But when you start looking at these experiences from a different type of perspective, you can start to see them, or that they could very likely be tied into profound life lessons, things that life teaches us, the journey of the soul, whatever. And the strange thing is it's real hard to tie deep life lessons, soul journey lessons, and all that type of quote unquote higher level stuff, higher perspective stuff, to traumas like being horribly abused as a child, physically, sexually, mentally, or any other kind of way you could traumatize and abuse a child as a parent. Nobody wants to attach a higher level meaning to such horrible atrocities happening to developing children by their own parents. And I fully and completely understand that. But when you can remove judgment of the imposer of the trauma and look at the traumas from a more benign perspective and look at what those traumas did to you or for you as a human being, again, from a higher perspective, you might find a couple of things. I mean, any number of things could manifest, but I'm going to run through this to give you a sense of the types of scenarios or things where you can look at it and say, yes, wow, that actually had a major impact in molding me in a particular way that turned out to not be so bad. Let's say you were physically abused by your parents when you were a kid, and later on you were able to look back and see how through that series of experiences it strengthened you physically in a certain way, or internally in a certain way, that when you look back at life, you recognize that had you not been strengthened in the way that you can now see from the perspective of an adult and look back at your own development and say, holy shit, I see something that I didn't see before. And these are just examples, but they're not that far-fetched, where some physical thing happened and it made you stronger so that at a point when you were 25 or 30, you were, or whenever it might have been, you were strong enough to be able to deal with something that came later on in life. Let's say, I hate to use this example, but let's say you were a girl and you were being, horribly raped by your brothers, by the friends of your brothers, or your father, or some horrible fucking thing and they made it really. So one of the things that a little girl might do is switch off her brain and go over into fairy tale land, creativity land, the land of make-believe, and get lost over there. And you're like, well, what the fuck is your point? Well, ultimately, when you look back at that from the perspective of an older woman that is trying to release the baggage, you can begin to see that while horrible those experiences were, it drove your mind into a creative side of your existence where, things are much different, unicorns, fairy dust, whatever it might be, that blossomed a level of creativity in you that later on you became very artistic, you became very creative, and somehow it's benefited you in life. The genesis of that creativity blossoming in you were horrible traumas that took place that quite literally drove you as a child into that place in your mind as an escape. And since you got used to that place, you knew how to get back to that place of escape. There was wonderful things you were able to do there, up to and including shield yourself from horrible traumas. When you start seeing, if you can, not everybody can, these types of traumas and the associated ways in which they may have molded you, you're trying to find, there's no two ways about it, a diamond in a big vat of, poo. Because that's what the experience was. A big vat of nasty poo. Hate to be gross, but it is what it is. When you liken, something physical to what these experiences are, it would be that. And on our journey of healing and reconciling these things within our minds, within our emotional bodies, within our energy bodies, within our psychological bodies, within our hearts and all that other stuff, I truly believe that one of the only ways that a human is going to be able to do that is to approach it from these types of higher perspective, looking at this shit, and recognizing that along the journey of your life, you had a parent that was a drug addict and a real loser and was stealing from you and all kinds of weird shit. And then somehow, that was happening to you when you were young. You had to become smarter. You had to become savvy. You had to become more vigilant. You had to become far more aware because you had some drug or some addict behavior, and you got to be vigilant around those people. And somehow in life, that vigilance, that awareness, that awareness, that's an amazing thing, to be very aware. Most people are not. They lack self-awareness. They lack just so many levels of awareness. You could see that as a benefit. And again, I'm just trying to come up with examples where as we approach the traumas and reconciling this shit to the point where we can then begin to see it from a higher perspective of the evolution of us as beings, as souls, as a human, whatever, when we can see it from that higher perspective, it provides a mechanism for us to then be able to finally let go of it. And letting go of it is just emptying out that Santa Claus-sized bag of, for instance, that trauma or a series of traumas that you're focused on. And along with that goes the resentment, goes the bitterness, goes the vitriolic or caustic emotions that one might associate to them or might be tied to them. For someone who is, for instance, codependent, and you're constantly pulling in narcissistic people into your life, and then these connections become deep and all this stuff, and you go through relationship after relationship, and it's always narcissistic people. Well, and then rather than feel through the pain of the breakup and having somebody leave you and all that other stuff, you just rebound into another relationship, and within 2 to 4 weeks or whatever, something ridiculous, you're in someone else's bed in someone else's arms, and use that person as a means to dull the pain, forget about the pain completely, and ultimately use your new experience as a sledgehammer that beats down any pain that you might have felt through that experience further into your subconscious mind. Keeping in mind, the more of this rotten stuff that I'm talking about within the refrigerator of our mind is turning rotten and putrefying and other such things. Like when something rots, gases come from that. And eventually there's going to be an escapage of gas, so to speak. Open the refrigerator, you get hit with that nasty smell. Or in life, because you're carrying around that trauma deep within you, because you're carrying around a well or an ocean or a lake or whatever of pain that you haven't dealt with, you have triggers that you may not even be consciously aware of. And then something happens accidentally, on purpose. Somebody intends to do it. They do it by accident, whatever. And a trigger is hit, and bang, that gas releases and something comes out that stinks. And it manifests for everybody in a different way, but generally it's behaviors or any other types of things. Sometimes people turn that shit on themselves. Sometimes they turn it on other people. It's just the way in which this toxic shit within us in this context manifests itself. For some people, they're just completely always assholes. For others, it's not until that trigger is hit. And for those that get to a point where they recognize that they must heal themselves through their own efforts, due to a series of traumas that they experienced through no fault of their own, through a relationship that went bad, through childhood, blah, 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 blah. Ultimately, the reality of it is you have to go back to these traumas, and the most healthy way is to feel through it all. You have to feel through it all. And in feeling through pain, there's a myriad of lessons for us to learn. Those lessons are designed and questions that we will ask that will lead us to learning. And we will see that there are lessons through the experience that are designed to teach us what we need to know so that it does not fucking happen again. But if we're jumping from relationship to relationship because we don't want to feel the fucking pain and all that other type of stuff, we are literally doing ourselves a disservice amongst being, just a douchebag, but in the growth of ourselves as humans, so to speak. By not allowing ourselves to go through that traumatic experience without filling that void in some other way so we don't have to feel that pain, never actually learning a lesson, constantly making the same fucking mistakes that bring or cause us to choose the same types of fucking people in our life. So, if you're able to successfully avoid all of the pain and you got all these buckets of pain that you've carried around with you and you find a way to release that pain, you're like, fuck that, I ain't feeling that pain. I did what I did. There was pain. I didn't have to sit there and feel it. I used Johnny to fill the gap. I used, Sally to fill the gap. You know what that means for you? Life is probably ultimately going to, over time, different person, different scenario, but throw you a similar scenario where those same types of things are going to unfold again. Because since you didn't learn the lessons, you're going to keep getting hit with the same types of experiences, whether by your own hand or through somebody else's, and you didn't see what you needed to see to prevent it from happening. Ultimately, you're going to continue to repeat the same fucking thing one way or another, because there are forces here working behind the scenes that you can't see and you can't stop it. So unless you allow yourself to go through that traumatic experience and feel all through it, don't go out and get into a relationship until you've gone through it all and feel through it all and heal yourself from experience. Chances are when you go back out into the world, you'll be choosing somebody with a very different perspective than had you pushed it all down and just did a rebound and got into another relationship quickly with somebody else. You see where I'm going with that? In some contexts of life, I guess in most, pain is designed to teach us things, yet people will avoid their pain, the pain that life throws their way, like the fucking plague. And that is a fact, Jack. People are hardwired to avoid fucking pain. There's no two ways about that. With the experience that I had with that woman and experiencing the dark night of the soul, cognitive dissonance, CPTSD, losing myself, and soul shock, without going through the fucking gauntlet that was. And this was an experience where I was forced. There was nothing I could do. I was staked in the abyss with my shadow. There was no moment. I mean, there was just nothing but the pain. And when I look back and see what came out of me through that, I see how that pain drove my mind to asking questions. Those questions drove me to want to find the fucking answers. And then I became an awful lot more knowledgeable through the process of feeling through all of that fucking pain about narcissism, about childhood abuse, childhood trauma. I became so much more knowledgeable about human suffering, human engineering, the human condition, and all that other stuff. And I learned such a myriad of fucking lessons that I never would have otherwise concerned myself with. The reason all of this has come out of me in the last 4.5 years has been a byproduct of the pain that I've experienced. Some of it has been deep words of wisdom and spiritual truths and truths about the reality of how the fucking world works and all that other stuff. I tell you, something about my shadow can really talk hardcore and fucking raw about the true reality or true realities of this construct, if you will. I'm trying more and more to keep my shadow out of the conversation most of the time when I'm doing monologues moving forward, because my shadow has his own way of expressing himself, and he's generally pretty rash and abrasive and yeah. So anyway, going through the amount of pain that I went through and then looking at what it did to me, there's a lot of things that I can say that it did to me. It made me, it brought up a lot of caustic and vitriolic emotions and energies and yada, 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 yada. But when I look back and I'm like, okay, it was those emotions and that caustic and vitriolic substance that were the things that were causing the pain, that drove the mind to asking the questions, that gave me the tenacity to want to find the answers, because I wanted to understand the source of the fucking pain. I wanted to understand all of it. And then the more I began to understand what narcissists are, covert narcissists, how they play the game, what ghosting is, what that's intended to do as a weapon and an abusing tool and tactic and all that other shit, when I started to see it all, there were aspects of the pain that started to go away, because I started to realize that what I was actually dealing with was an extremely fucking deceptive, cunningly deceptive, and predatory, very toxic, deceitful, deceiving, betraying person. And, well, it still didn't make it all better. I just got to, at that point, I became far more pissed that I was being deceived, that I was targeted, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I started looking at it all after the fact, and like, wow, I had to feel through all of that motherfucking pain. And the more I thought about it, the more pain it created. The more I thought about it, the more I asked questions. It was like this fucking vicious cycle. And on some levels, it's not like an experience itself. The act that someone may do is going to be the entirety of the source of the pain from that experience. Some of the sources of the pain from that experience can actually and literally be your own thinking. Even if you're thinking about all the truth and reality of what happened and you're not, but if you're focused on it, ruminating on it, you can get yourself pissed. It's interesting. And it becomes this vicious cycle where on some levels, you're actually creating your own pain tied to the experience that might be far more than if you weren't, from a very toxic perspective, focused on it. It's interesting. God damn, it's really interesting how this shit happens and unfolds, how we deal with it and experience it. It's interesting when you look at how we're so fucking avoidant of pain to the degree that all of us can be, yet life is so full of it. It's interesting when you look at pain from a removed perspective after being forced to go through it and see that, wow, you can learn from it. Wow, there's a lot of deep, soulful fucking lessons to learn through pain. Wow, when you look back and you see that if I avoid the pain, I don't get the lessons. I probably repeat same behavior that causes same pains to manifest in life yet again. If I avoid yet again the pain, I repeat same behaviors in life, dealing with the same types of things, different scenario, or same scenario, different people, same shit, different day type thing. Because I didn't allow myself to feel through the pain that was tied to the experience. Think about what I'm saying here. In a weird sort of way, pain is your friend because it is your dearest fucking teacher in this life. Even though when you're in an ocean of pain, you can say how brutal of a teacher life is and it's a merciless, vile bitch. Yes, but her lessons are thorough. And for many people, when you get to the point where you can see it like I'm explaining it, when life teaches you a lesson, you generally don't need that lesson to be repeated more than once, especially when you're consciously aware of it. all other things being the same in, as far as experience and trauma for everybody, being unconscious through the process and no awareness, probably a very different experience and probably very conducive to avoiding the pain and repeating the process ad infinitum until at some point you're forced to deal with a level of pain that you cannot escape. That's an interesting thing right there. Is for the first time in my life, well, the first time that really that I remember that I can actually say yet, I was forced into a level of pain that was wholly unbearable, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. There was no way to avoid it. I just wasn't physically, mentally, psychologically, emotionally capable. I was wiped the fuck out. So I had to literally feel through every goddamn fucking nano morsel of fucking pain that there was through that experience, on top of any pain that I may have created for myself through the fucking rumination driven by the resentment and the bitterness and just the whole goddamn fucking experience. But when I look back, I'm like, damn, that was more pain than I would have ever expected in anything and ever wanted, ever asked for. I'm resentful as fuck. It all happened, yada, yada, yada. But when I look back, I'm like, God damn, that pain taught me a lot. Holy fuck, did I learn some shit through that fucking experience? I learned lessons that were the source of that motherfucking lesson, or the genesis of me was, well, it might have been the experience from the vile, deceiving, betraying person. It was ultimately the pain that was associated to it that drives the mind into thinking and contemplating things that the mind would never otherwise do. Thusly, we become more knowledgeable when we go through this process, wiser, more aware, and there's just so many things to get out of embracing the pain because there's so many goddamn lessons in it. And if you've ever heard I think I've said it a handful of times, but it's true. And I've said it because I've heard other people say it. And I had that aha moment where now I get what the hell they were saying. If you've ever heard anybody say, chase your pain. That's not saying go out and look for pain and create a situation where somebody's injecting pain into your life. But it's where and when life fucking has a heaping helping for you. And most people would be inclined to want to avoid it and run from it, suppress it, not deal with it. You know, I'm too busy with life. I can't let it get all the things that we tell ourselves. I fully get it. No judgment here. This is just kind of a manifestation that happens for people. And, you know, would I know what it is that I'm saying had this not happened? No. Would I be able to say with the degree of certainty and confidence that I am that this is a major factor here had I not been forced, quite literally fucking forced, to deal with a level of pain that and having absolutely no way to deal with it, if you catch my meaning. I mean, it's just so overwhelming, so all-encompassing. I don't give a fuck who you are. At some point, you're going to succumb to that shit, and that pain's just going to take you to the pain, the pain locker. It's going to, like a rushing river that's going to wash out into the ocean. It's just taking you out there, and there ain't nothing you can fucking do about it. There's no life saving. You're just going for a fucking ride, and all that ride and experience has to offer you. I didn't just walk into some painful thing and say, let me, because I'm so tough and internally strong and noble and wise, and just going to jump right in here and see what this pain teaches me and just give it a big old hug and embrace it because there's just so much wisdom there. No, that's not what I did. I met an extremely horrible fucking person that did extremely horrible thing and blah, blah, blah. We all have the genesis of these sources of pain. Whether you're a man or a woman, whether it was your parents that did it to you as children, whether it was this or that, your uncle, your brother, your sister, your cousin, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your husband, your wife, yada, it doesn't fucking matter. These things unfold in people's lives. And remember, I mean, it really, I think, is a useful thing to consider and keep in your mind that feeling through pain is a process that is very much like the grieving process that has its stages that we must go through. In our own freaking time, too. There's no way that you can really force this shit. This cannot be forced or sped up. Generally, for most people. I mean, that's the way it works. It's a natural process of us, the grieving process, for us to release the pain, blah, blah, blah. There's just a natural process to grieving, similar for feeling through the pain associated to the trauma. And there is a natural process that I think is quite real, that the human must go through to mentally and emotionally reconcile. And this is on the path of healing. This is not stuffing it down and pretending it's not there and that you've dealt with it, knowing you haven't dealt with it. Dealing with it really comes no matter how you approach it, where you are able to mentally and emotionally reconcile the experience that you had, the trauma that it was, and its impact and subsequent repercussions in your life. Once you can mentally and emotionally, psychologically reconcile all that stuff, and there's no more charge, and you can let it go, or you can reframe it in your mind and see those lessons, see those things that it may have offered you in the crudest of ways that the brutal bitch called life offers as far as lessons. When you get to a point where you can do that and reframe it, and you have felt through all the pain, that's where healing comes in. That's where you get to the point where you're standing on the precipice of letting go or forgiveness. And I think the real difference between the two is the forgiveness is where the door is open, the line of communication is there, trust can be rebuilt, and you could do this again. You know, there was a mistake that, but letting go is when you're dealing with somebody that, you know, injected trauma into your experience of life that never showed a morsel of remorse or anything like that. They've revealed themselves to be the true pieces of shit of a human being, the soulless meat sack that they truly are, and you'll never get, you know, an apology or any of that stuff. As far as I'm concerned, those are people that should be the experience and all that. That's where you let that go. And you're not opening the door again. You're not, you know, providing an environment where communication could happen, trust could be reestablished, or any of that other stuff. So there's a precipice there where letting go. I mean, with forgiveness, clearly you've let go, but there are accoutrements that are associated to forgiveness. If you really get down to it, there are accoutrements that are associated to forgiveness for the most part. And I think that for people who say they have forgiven and those accoutrements aren't actually there, I think it's more fair to say that what they've done is they let it go. With love, with respect, with peace. But if it's one of those deals where, oh no, we ain't talking again. Oh no, I don't want you back in my life. Oh no, there's no fucking chance that we will ever reconcile this. There's, you know, blah, blah, blah. You know, there are plenty of people who can be quite healthy in standing in that perspective and letting something go and moving forward, lessons learned, no hard feelings, no animosity, no more charge, no more nothing. So anyway, I've talked about that point a little more than I thought I would or wanted to in this monologue, just suggesting that when we get to that point where we've been able to reframe and see and can now associate consciously and even subconsciously a new meaning to the experiences that we have that we call traumas, then we can let it go. Then letting go becomes much more easy or possible. Then the associated bitterness and caustic emotions generally go along with that. Now, once we've let that go, there's also, well, possibly for some people, what we've carried with us in the form of baggage has helped us to form patterns of behavior that we call defense mechanisms or this or that, that once you heal from something and let it go and released it, forgiven, whatever it is that you've done, and you've really done it, well, you may have to spend some time doing integrative type work where now, since you're seeing things from a different perspective and you've embraced that you kind of need to approach certain things that you do in life in a bit of a different way, because and that way being more conducive to being healthy rather than, you know, pushing away potential life partners or intimate people. You now become a little bit more open and a little bit more receptive because you're not girded with the baggage and the pain and all, you know, you see how that works out. I hope you do. So anyway, I don't think my perspective on pain is that unique. I just don't think that a lot of people have spent the time to really think and ponder what pain is for. And when you start looking at life from a higher perspective, spiritual perspective, and you start to say, if this is the journey of the soul, and I learned things through these horrible traumas imposed upon me as a kid that made me smarter, wiser, more independent, more resourceful, more creative, more this, more that, because through that trauma, this, that, and the other, you know, began to blossom to me, and it may not have otherwise. Okay. You just got to wonder why life has to serve us up such crude lessons that cause such profound traumas to the development, to developing children as a species that needs a healthy and balanced developmental process to go on in order for them humans to be healthy and balanced humans, you know, that kind of thing. There's a process that's necessary that contains specific stages. Each one of those stages require various things to unfold in pretty specific ways in order for that child to develop in some healthy and meaningful fucking way. Well, we're born into a world where these types of traumas unfold for those developing children, even though we're developed as a species that needs to not have these shits happening all over the place. And humans are girded with traumas and pains and repressed and suppressed shit just rotting in them like the food in the refrigerator that's not been eaten. And then we have triggers that things in life will eventually trigger. And, you know, to the degree that those triggers and the subsequent behaviors and manifestations when that happens cause pain in someone's life, that is probably going to be directly proportionate to the degree of interest they have in beginning to analyze certain things about themselves, look inward, and, well, ask deeper questions. Pain is a very profound teacher. Yet, certain people may not be able to handle the pain and may not get the lesson. Thusly, they'll either avoid the pain or through the experience of the pain, they're so focused on the pain that they don't ask the questions. They just get mad, and then the experience is over. Well, I think that in those experiences or those scenarios where somebody goes through it or they don't go through it, meaning the pain, and if they didn't get the fucking lesson, eventually it's going to manifest again in some other way. I think that's just the way this construct is written. I think that's the way this shit is written. And if you got the lesson, and you finally get through it and all that stuff, you got the lesson, I'm more inclined to think that life's still going to throw it at you one more time just to make sure. Meaning that type of scenario. And now that you finally learned the lesson, you probably won't get nearly as deep into that type of scenario, if at all. Avoiding the pain, avoiding the suffering, proving to fucking your spirit, your soul, the universe, whatever the fuck it is, that you finally learned the lesson. And then the next time something comes your way, it'll probably be like the perfect thing. Or maybe we want to believe that it works that way. But I think you get what I'm trying to say there. And another thing, they say, time heals all wounds. Well, think about this. There is some truth in that, because you get further and further and further away from the experience and all of that. Then all of a sudden it has less impact on you. But let's say something happens, massive trauma, massive wound, not dealt with, a lot of pain, not dealt with, get stuff down. Move forward, move forward, move forward. Even telling yourself, life's good, positive perspective, blah, 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 all that stuff. Since you didn't deal with the pain, since you didn't deal with the trauma, what that means is that wound can be reopened. Think about that for a second. When you deal with these things in a healthy, normal way, deal with it, and you have felt through the pain and that wound closes, it's almost like there's no way to open that wound again, because there's nothing below the surface of that scar that could fester. You see what I'm saying? Everything that we have within us that is undealt with, and a wound closes over top of that, if you catch the analogy, or the metaphor, whatever, those things underneath the surface there are the very things that can cause infection. Thusly, poor behaviors, poor this, that, or the other, poor judgment, all kinds of things begin, like it'd be like maybe we're getting a little septic and we start to get a little sick because something's not fucking right, because there's something toxic trapped under the surface of our skin. Or, and then maybe it reinfects and that wound comes open again, whether it's somebody triggered it or not. Think about how these types of analogies apply. It's not until you get out of your body what is underneath the surface of that wound. And in life, sometimes if you don't deal with all your shit, somebody else comes along and causes that trauma again, re-wounds you and opens that fucking wound up. And it is painful as fuck. And you may want their fucking head. But you might get to a point where you can see it, that actually kind of had to happen to reopen that wound. So I could get all that poison that was stuck underneath the fucking surface out of me. Think about what I'm saying to you. I've thought a lot about this. And I think in the general way that I'm speaking about it, most people can see what it is that I'm saying. These scenarios of childhood trauma being suppressed and then fermenting and rotting within us like food within the refrigerator that never gets eaten. If we can avoid the pain of a trauma, avoid the experience to the degree that people will avoid the pain and not deal with it, we may very well even be lucky enough to throw away that trauma. Like you very much like you might throw away something in a container that has gone rancid inside and you just don't even want to open that damn thing up. You'll buy another container. Maybe some of us will get lucky enough to be able to do that with some of the buckets of pain that we carry underneath the surface of us and be able to rid ourselves of that pain. Some people might call that a karmic bucket of pain. But at the same time, that means that this construct, the universe, whatever you want to call it, is basically going to line that experience up again. Could be a little worse this time to really grab your fucking attention. And in some cases, the universe is going to grab you, or the construct, your spirit, your soul, whatever it is that sets this shit up so that these things manifest in our fucking life, is going to set it up sometimes so that it injects a level of pain into your experience that you can't fucking escape. And that is a humbling experience. That is a humble experience. That will be a humbling experience for anybody that experiences it who has gone through their life avoiding their pain at all costs. And when you get forced to deal with pain, it causes you to look at things you wouldn't otherwise look at. It causes you to question things you wouldn't otherwise question, analyze things you wouldn't otherwise analyze, up to and including your motherfucking self. Pain can induce extremely high levels of self-awareness too, through the process of self-analyzation and inflection that pain can induce. But I suppose it really depends on where you're at in your journey of life, because certain pain will shut certain people down completely, incapacitate people to the point where they can't function. I've been there. I've had pain in my life literally incapacitate me to the point where functioning was one of the most challenging things that I had to do. And I was able to do it in the few times where it was really necessary here and there. But pain manifests in a myriad of different ways. And I would argue or guess or speculate that it's not until you're at a higher level of knowledge or awareness, consciousness, possibly even on a bit of a spiritual journey in your life, that most people will get to a point where they're able to ponder these things, consider these things, and look at some of the atrocities that happen here. There's arguments for why so consistent, why when we're children, yada, 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 because it never gives the child the ability to fully develop into what they could have fully developed into, and then be able to go on and deal with life. No, most people, when you strip it down, are wounded fucking children inside that have spent a lifetime either not dealing with or willfully avoiding pains and traumas that were injected into their fucking lives as children. And the pain and the lessons associated to the pain that they've avoided feeling throughout their whole lives are probably the very lessons that would have helped them to grow and mature in ways that when you look at them now and the manifestations of their life are probably the ways that they haven't, to a large degree, grown and matured and developed in life. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it's not a hard, fast rule, but those with any wisdom of the years or intellect to kind of look at what it is that I've been laying out here and kind of look at what you know about life and how all this works out to say, yeah, that's actually pretty true for the most part, for most people, generally in most situations. And I say it that way because, of course, there are exceptions to every rule. There are anomalies and all this other type of shit. But when you look at pain from the perspective of a teacher that is used to teach humans lessons, to the degree that we avoid the pain, we avoid the lesson and ensure cycle after cycle, if you will, of that type of pain repeating itself, manifesting itself in our fucking lives because we haven't learned the fucking lesson yet. And in closing, I'll leave you with these two ideas to ponder. Along the journey of healing, for anyone that will go down it, there are two things that most will agree are very necessary in order to progress. And without these two things happening, you will not achieve the healing. The first one is to feel through the pain. The old cliche of feel it to heal it. And it's not until we feel through it all that it's gone. Just like it's not until we eat all the food in the refrigerator that it's gone. And in this context, we're not talking about, let's just throw it away. Because it's designed to teach you. It's designed for you to learn and to grow and to evolve as a human being. And somehow, since we're avoiding it, we're avoiding the lesson. Therefore, ensuring that life is going to throw it back at us again. Different person, different time, when we least expect it, and we're probably going to experience it again. When you chase your pain, or when you allow yourself to feel your pain, to feel through it, you grow, you learn, you mature, you evolve. No two fucking ways about it. When you avoid your pain, you allow yourself to stay in the same condition to a large degree that you were in when the scenario that created your pain manifested itself. And when I say same condition, you effectively are lacking the lessons that pain would have otherwise taught you, so that moving forward in life, you'll never make those same choices, see things in the way that allowed that pain to come into your fucking life. In a weird sort of way, when you run from your pain and you avoid it, you are stunting or stifling your own growth as a human, as a being. And if there's truth to this whole soul's journey, you are, in many cases, probably preventing a soul lesson from manifesting. And there's another scenario where life's going to just keep throwing the same type of shit at you until that lesson is fucking learned. And I think that applies with life lessons, with spiritual lessons, soul lessons, whatever the types of levels of learning and lessons that the human is going to go through in this experience of life. If we're not learning the lessons because we're avoiding the fucking pain, we're quite literally inhibiting and preventing our own growth and furtherance of our journey, and all that other kind of shit. Think about what I'm saying. So anyway, some food for thought for anybody that might follow my content that has pursued the learning or the healing journey, is on the healing journey, questions the purpose of pain, why so much of it, yada, 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 some perspective to chew on for your consideration relevant to some of these things. And it is interesting to me that, for me anyway, when I look at this, it's not until the human is able to reach a level of acceptance of the experience and actually reframe the meaning that many of us will be able to heal or release and heal from severely traumatic experiences. Effectively, it is a form of mental gymnastics. On one level, you could actually articulate it as you have to mindfuck yourself into seeing it from a different perspective. Because there is the true reality of the atrocity that you experienced. But then if there are these things about soul's journey, life lessons, yada, 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 if that is at play, that would explain on some levels how and why some of this stuff manifests when you have enough time and age and wisdom of the years to be able to look back at some of these horrible experiences because you had enough of them yourself and see how there's so much goddamn growth in pain and in suffering. I mean, it opens up a whole different, Pandora's box of questions about what kind of sick, twisted fucking thing would make such profound learning and growth and evolution of you as a being come through the vehicle of profound pain and suffering and fucking trauma. Had I not gone through what I've gone through in the last 4.5 years, I would never be able to say there's lessons in pain. And I mean deep, profound, soulful kind of fucking deep lessons in pain, in suffering, in purgatory. I think these types of experiences are truly designed to teach. And I think that a lot of people that reach these places are largely more, not always, more awake, more aware, or they wouldn't be there. I mean, I suppose you could be one profoundly unconscious and brain dead individual and go through some purgatorial type experience and really get nothing out of the experience from a learning and lesson. I suppose that's possible. But I would tend to think that these types of experiences are reserved for those who are capable of experiencing and pulling out the nuggets of wisdom. Because to go through what I went through and not learn anything through it, oh my God, what a waste of fucking time that would have been. Whew. All I have to do is go through something like that once, and I can guarantee you that shit will never happen again. But anyway, I digress. So just a little philosophical perspective on pain, suffering, healing, trauma, and all that unpleasant stuff. Take it easy, people.